The world's longest undefended border, stretching for thousands of miles through forests, mountains, and prairies, is now a flashpoint in a rapidly escalating conflict. What was once a symbol of peace and cooperation between two close allies has become the front line of a new kind of confrontation. In a stunning move that caught many by surprise, Canada threatened to impose heavy tolls on American trucks using the Alaska Highway, the vital land link between Alaska and the rest of the U.S. For decades, this highway has been a lifeline, carrying goods, families, and dreams across the vast northern wilderness. Now it's at the center of a bitter dispute. This wasn't a backroom dispute, it was a public declaration of economic warfare, broadcast on national television and debated in Parliament. The world watched as two of the globe's closest trading partners squared off in the open. British Columbia, backed by Ottawa and other provinces, made it clear, if the U.S. wanted a trade fight, Canada would strike where it hurt most, the arteries of commerce. The message was unmistakable, and the stakes were enormous for both sides. President Trump responded instantly, blasting Canada on social media and accusing Prime Minister Trudeau of hostile actions. The White House called emergency meetings, and the diplomatic temperature dropped to freezing. The rhetoric quickly escalated, turning what began as a trade spat into a full-blown crisis of sovereignty and national pride. Protesters gathered at border crossings, waving flags and demanding action from their leaders. The Alaska Highway, once a symbol of North American cooperation and engineering triumph, was now a pawn in a high-stakes standoff. Its empty stretches became a stark reminder of how quickly trust can evaporate. The open road, long taken for granted by truckers and travelers alike, had become a vulnerability, a pressure point in a much larger struggle. This crisis didn't erupt overnight. It was the result of simmering tensions over trade, tariffs, and respect that had been building for years. Old grievances resurfaced, and new ones were born in the heat of the moment. As of July 17, 2025, the trucks still roll, but the threat is real and immediate. Every shipment that crosses the border now does so under a cloud of uncertainty, with livelihoods and entire industries hanging in the balance. The story of how we reached this breaking point is one of tariffs, retaliation, and political brinkmanship. It's a tale of leaders unwilling to back down, and of ordinary people caught in the crossfire. The U.S. Canada relationship, once rock solid and built on decades of trust, now teeters on the edge. Neighbors have become rivals, and uncertainty shadows every handshake. The border is no longer just a line on a map. It's a battleground, both literal and symbolic, where the future of two nations is being contested. The stakes for both nations have never been higher. What happens next will shape not only the fate of the border, but the destiny of North America itself. The spark? American tariffs. In March 2025, President Trump announced a sweeping 25% tariff on Canadian goods, claiming it was time to rebalance the scales. Canada saw it as economic warfare, a betrayal by its closest ally. The impact would devastate Canadian industries from lumber to agriculture. Trudeau's government had to respond, but the roots ran deeper. In 2024, Canada had already begun tightening regulations on U.S. transit routes, citing environmental and indigenous concerns. Americans saw these as political maneuvers, not just administrative tweaks. The stage was set for confrontation. Canada reminded the U.S. that access to Alaska was a privilege, not a right. When Trump's tariffs landed, Canada was ready to use its leverage. The Alaska Highway became the obvious pressure point. Canada didn't blink. British Columbia introduced the Economic Stabilization Act, authorizing tolls on U.S. trucks heading to Alaska. Other provinces joined in. Ontario slapped a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S., and Yukon cut off American suppliers. Canada presented a united front. This was a national defense of economic sovereignty. The tolls weren't immediate, but the threat was real, giving diplomats time to negotiate. The message: Canada could squeeze the U.S. supply line to Alaska at any moment. With few alternative routes, the U.S. couldn't simply bypass Canada. The legal and logistical groundwork was set. The continent held its breath. Would Canada pull the trigger? Brinkmanship was the name of the game. The counterpunch was ready. President Trump's response was explosive. He took to social media, accusing Canada of trying to cut off Alaska and painting Trudeau as a weak, hostile leader. Trump's rhetoric turned a trade dispute into a national security crisis, rallying his base and stoking outrage. He threatened more tariffs and even hinted at military action to keep the Alaska corridor open, an unthinkable escalation. Trump's words undermined diplomatic efforts, fueling chaos and uncertainty. His supporters cheered his tough stance, but allies and experts were alarmed. The president's fury became a central part of the crisis. The stakes and the risks kept rising. For Alaska's 730,000 residents, this isn't politics, it's survival. The Alaska Highway is the lifeline for time-sensitive goods, fresh food, medicine, and vital equipment. Tolls would drive up prices and threaten supply chains, hitting families and businesses hard. The threat isn't just higher costs, it's the risk of empty shelves and critical delays. The highway is also the only year-round road link for families, tourists, and the military. Alaskans feel vulnerable, their connection to the U.S. at the mercy of a foreign government. The crisis has shattered trust and forced a painful re-evaluation of Alaska's dependence on Canada. Alternatives like air freight or expanded shipping are costly and slow. For now, Alaska is exposed and everyone feels the squeeze. From Canada's perspective, these actions are not acts of aggression but rather necessary steps in self-defense. Ottawa sees itself as responding to external pressure, not provoking it. The government's message is clear. Canada is standing up for its own interests and for the rights of its citizens in the face of mounting challenges from its southern neighbor. Prime Minister Trudeau and provincial leaders have repeatedly argued that they were left with no real choice after Trump's sweeping tariffs and trade restrictions. They framed their response as reluctant but resolute, emphasizing that Canada's hand was forced by U.S. actions that threatened Canadian jobs and industries. The united front, across party lines, demonstrates that this is about defending Canadian sovereignty, not about partisan politics. Even opposition parties have rallied behind the government, recognizing the stakes for the entire country. In the north, Yukon's premier has been vocal, stressing that the new measures are aimed squarely at Washington's policies, not at ordinary Alaskans who cross the border for work, family, or trade. Canada wants to send a strong message. It is not a junior partner, but a sovereign nation with real leverage. The government is determined to show that it can and will defend its interests on the world stage. The 2024 regulatory changes were rooted in genuine concerns: environmental impact, infrastructure costs, and the rights of Indigenous peoples. These issues have long been debated in Canada, and the current crisis has brought them to the forefront of national policy. For many in Ottawa and the provinces, the current crisis is also an opportunity, a chance to force a broader reassessment of U.S. Canada transit, trade, and the balance of power at the border. Canada's strategy is layered. It involves tit-for-tat retaliation, but also a calculated effort to assert its independence and demand respect from its powerful neighbor. The message is unmistakable. U.S. access to Canada is no longer something to be taken for granted, but a privilege that can be restricted if necessary. Canadian leaders believe they're acting from a position of both legal and moral strength, confident that their actions are justified under international law and supported by public opinion. They're betting that the economic pain felt in Alaska will ultimately pressure President Trump and his administration back to the negotiating table, opening the door for a more balanced relationship. For Canada, the era of being taken for granted is over. The country is determined to chart its own course and to make sure its voice is heard. Legally, Canada holds all the cards. International law is clear. Canada controls its territory and can regulate or tax transit as it sees fit. The Alaska Highway was built during World War II as a temporary military route, not a permanent U.S. right-of-way. Since then, access has been a courtesy, not a legal obligation. Canadian experts argue the proposed tolls are fully within provincial jurisdiction. Geography reinforces this power. There are no viable alternative land routes. The U.S. can't simply build a new road, it must cross Canadian land. Trump's threats of military action are seen as outlandish and dangerous. Any incursion would violate international law and shatter alliances. The State Department knows this, focusing on diplomacy instead. Canada stands firm. Sovereignty and law are on its side. The U.S. has its own levers. Alaska's Senator Dan Sullivan threatened to waive the Passenger Vessel Services Act, allowing cruise ships to bypass British Columbia entirely. BC's tourism industry, reliant on nearly 2 million cruise passengers, would be devastated. The move would cost hundreds of millions and thousands of jobs. The conflict has now spread beyond highways to tourism, energy, and procurement. Each side is probing for weaknesses, escalating the economic standoff. If Canada imposes tolls, the U.S. could cripple BC's ports. Retaliation risks spiraling out of control, turning allies into adversaries. Businesses and communities on both sides are caught in the crossfire. The cruise ship Gambit shows how quickly things can escalate. As of mid-July 2025, the future is uncertain. The world is watching as tensions simmer between two of North America's closest allies. The stakes are high, and the outcome will shape not just the border, but the lives of millions who depend on it every day. Public posturing continues, neither side wants to blink first. Leaders deliver carefully crafted statements, each trying to project strength while avoiding any sign of weakness. The threat of tolls and countermeasures hangs over the continent. Businesses, truckers, and families wait anxiously, uncertain if their daily routines will be upended by new restrictions. But behind the scenes, diplomats are working non-stop. Negotiators shuttle between embassies, burning the midnight oil in search of a compromise that can satisfy both sides. A possible deal is on the table. The U.S. drops or reduces tariffs, opening the door for trade to flow more freely once again. In exchange, Canada repeals its toll legislation, signaling a willingness to restore trust and cooperation. Both leaders could claim victory and de-escalate, presenting the agreement as a win for their respective countries and a step back from the edge. A deeper solution might involve a new transit agreement, one that addresses not just tolls, but the underlying issues that led to this standoff. This could mean U.S. contributions to highway upkeep, stricter environmental standards, and meaningful consultation with indigenous communities whose lands are crossed by the route. In return, the U.S. would get guaranteed access, restoring stability for Alaska and ensuring vital supply lines remain open. But trust has been badly damaged. Years of cooperation have given way to suspicion, and old alliances now feel fragile. The crisis could still spiral, with each side escalating in response to the other, risking a breakdown that would affect the entire continent. Or with enough political will, a breakthrough could pull both sides back from the brink, setting a new precedent for cross-border cooperation. The most likely outcome? A tense standoff with threats and negotiations used as leverage and both countries watching each other warily. The seamless border is gone, replaced by hard realities and national interests. The era of easy passage and mutual trust has ended, at least for now. The open road to Alaska is no longer a given. Every journey now carries uncertainty, and every crossing is a reminder of what's been lost. The U.S. Canada relationship has changed forever, leaving both nations to navigate a new and unpredictable chapter in their shared history.